And when it comes to Scorpio and religion, most people assume that the two have nothing to do with each other, that they are separate, even opposite worlds. But what if that assumption is completely wrong? There's something very few people realize. The most powerful symbols the Bible uses to describe real transformation, death and rebirth, descent into the abyss and return, purifying fire, tearing veil, are precisely the same patterns that define Scorpio from within, not as a vague metaphor, as a precise description. And there's one specific detail that changes everything. When the scriptures needed a symbol to represent one of the beings closest to the divine, they chose the eagle. And the oldest tradition has always known that the eagle is the elevated form of Scorpio. This is no coincidence, but the connection goes much deeper than this single symbol. By the end of this video, something you've felt inside for a long time, that intensity you learned to hide, that depth the world called excess, will gain a language it never had before. And that language doesn't come from astrology. It comes from a much older place. Scorpio is not the sign of darkness. It is the sign of the process that takes place in the darkness, the only process that produces real light. It begins with a symbol that most people are unfamiliar with. In the book of Ezekiel, there is a vision that scholars have debated for centuries. 4 living beings around the divine throne, each with a different face: lion, ox, man, and the eagle. These 4 beings return in the apocalypse. For those familiar with astrology, the correspondence is immediate. They are the 4 fixed signs. Leo is Leo, ox is Taurus, man is Aquarius, and the eagle is Scorpio. But not the scorpion of popular descriptions. Ancient tradition recognized 3 forms of this sign. The scorpion, instinctive, reactive. It wounds when threatened. The serpent, aware of its own power, but still unsure what to do with it. And the eagle, which sees from above, which transforms venom into vision. When the scriptures needed a symbol for one of the beings closest to the divine, they chose the eagle, the highest form of Scorpio. This is no small matter, and it becomes even more significant when you see where else Scorpio appears in sacred texts, not by name, but by pattern. Moses' bronze serpent. In Numbers, with the people dying from snake bites in the desert, God did not command them to eliminate the snakes. He commanded them to make a bronze serpent and place it on a pole. Whoever looked at it lived. Think about what this means. The instrument of death becomes the instrument of healing. It wasn't necessary to create something new. It was necessary to elevate the dangerous symbol, to place it in plain sight, and let those who had the courage to look directly at what threatened them find, in that very gaze, the way out. The poison and the antidote come from the same source. The same serpent that kills, heals. Scorpio lives this paradox every day. The intensity that can destroy relationships is the same intensity that creates unbreakable loyalty. The depth that frightens is the same depth that makes Scorpio the only one who remains when everything crumbles. What suffocates in high doses protects in the right dose. What seems excessive to an outside observer is precision for those who operate from within. And now comes the question that lingers. How does Scorpio know when it's using its power to heal and when it's using it to hurt? Why does that line seem so invisible from the inside? This question doesn't have an easy answer, but it does have an answer. And it begins with understanding what happens when Scorpio descends. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. It's not an astrology book in the conventional sense. It's a map for those who already feel they have an inner depth that hasn't yet been fully named, and who need to go deep, not stay on the surface of the explanations the world usually offers. Scorpio understands this instinctively. There is no real transformation without descent. There is no light without having passed through darkness. This book was written for those who already know this inside, but are still searching for the language to build from there. You are at that exact point right now, processing something, acknowledging something with a question that hasn't been fully answered yet. This is the right time to act, not after the video ends, not tomorrow, now, while it's still alive within you. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, what aspect of your Scorpio nature have you tried hardest to hide throughout your life? It doesn't have to be a long answer, just one word if you want. This exercise is for you, not for the audience. So, the descent. There is a pattern that runs through the most powerful biblical narratives of transformation. A pattern that most people don't notice because they are too busy with the end of the story. Jonah swallowed by the whale, 3 days in the monster's belly, in the dark, with no way out. Job losing everything, children, wealth, health, the ground beneath his feet, and sitting in the ashes without understanding why. Jesus in the tomb, 3 days between death and resurrection, between the end and what comes after. 3 completely different stories, 3 radically distinct forms of descent, one single pattern. Before the transformation, there is a descent into the abyss. It's not punishment, it's a process. And Scorpio does this. Scorpio descends, not because it chooses to, not because it likes to, not because it's masochistic. It descends because that's how it works inside. Every important emotional cycle goes through a point of darkness before becoming something else. Every relationship that ends leaves a mark that goes deep before it heals. Every real loss is processed in the gut, not on the surface. People around often don't understand this descent. They call it rumination. They call it not being able to get over it. They call it unnecessary intensity. And Scorpio learns to be ashamed of it, learns to try to jump straight into the light, to pretend it's already over, to end the process before it's truly finished. But Jonah didn't choose how long he stayed in the whale. Job didn't control the duration of his ashes. The descent has its own time. And trying to get out beforehand doesn't shorten the process, it only makes it last longer. What the scriptures don't say aloud, but clearly show in the patterns, those who have gone through the complete descent have emerged different. Jonah came out and went to Nineveh. Job came out and received double what he lost. Rebirth came after the abyss, not instead of it. Scorpio, when it allows itself to descend without being ashamed of it, without trying to shorten it, without judging itself for being in the dark, it emerges different. Always. It's a law. But there is a version of this descent that leads nowhere. A version that Scorpio knows well, the abyss that becomes a habit. The darkness that ceases to be a process and becomes an address. And the difference between the two is more subtle than it seems. This is the conversation that the chapter of Jonah never finishes telling. If the bronze serpent of Moses somehow resonated with you, the idea that poison and healing come from the same source, that what you carry most deeply may be exactly what transforms those around you, then this digital book is a natural extension of that recognition. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose delves deeper into this logic. How Scorpio can learn to read its own cycles, to recognize when it's using power as a tool and when it's using it as armor. It's a work of self-awareness that gets straight to the point, without romanticizing the process, without softening what needs to be seen. Scorpio doesn't need excessive gentleness, it needs truth. This book offers that. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There is a word that appears frequently in sacred texts and rarely receives sufficient attention. Desert, not as punishment, as preparation. Moses spent 40 years in the desert before receiving his mission. 40 years, not 40 days, 40 weeks, 40 months. 40 years of silence, of apparent futility, of a life that from the outside seemed stagnant. And it was there, in a burning thicket that did not consume itself, that the voice arrived. Not in the Pharaoh's court, not in the years of glory and power. In the desert. Elijah fled to the desert after his greatest victory. He had just defeated 450 prophets of Baal single-handedly and collapsed. He asked to die. And it was there, in that state of utter exhaustion, that he heard what the texts call the still small voice. Not the strong wind, not the earthquake, not the fire, the voice that was only heard after everything else had passed. John the Baptist lived in the desert, not as an exile, but as a choice. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert before beginning his public ministry. The biblical desert is not absence, it is space. It is the place where all the noise stops competing with what is essential. Scorpio has this inner desert, the tendency toward isolation that those around them often interpret as coldness, distance, or lack of interest. It's none of those things. It's the same instinct that led all these characters to the desert before the most important moments of their lives, the need for real silence before anything true can be heard. An instrument needs silence before playing, not because of a problem, it's for preparation. But there's a question Scorpio needs to ask from time to time. Is this silence preparing for something, or is it preventing something? Because the desert that prepares and the desert that protects look the same on the outside. Inside, the difference is everything. The desert that prepares has internal movement. There is processing happening. Something is being refined, clarified, transformed. The desert that protects has stagnation. It has the same thought circulating without advancing. It has a feeling of security that, over time, begins to resemble a prison with invisible walls. Scorpio knows the difference. Sometimes you refuse to know. And that's exactly what the torn veil came to talk about. At the moment Jesus died on the cross, the text describes something that happened in the temple. The veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple, a thick fabric, 6 meters high, that no ordinary mortal could pass through, was torn from top to bottom. Not from base to top, as if a human being had pulled, from top to bottom. The torn veil is one of the most powerful images of irreversible transformation in sacred texts. It is not reform, it is not adjustment, it is rupture. What existed on the other side is now accessible, and what was separated can no longer be separated in the same way. Scorpio recognizes this trait. Is this? Not metaphorically, literally. There's a type of transformation that Scorpio undergoes that's irreversible. A revelation, a loss, a discovery about oneself or someone else that changes one's perspective forever. You can't pretend you didn't see it. You can't go back to what you were before knowing what you know. The veil has been torn, and what was hidden is now exposed. People around Scorpio are sometimes disconcerted by this characteristic. Why can't you just forget? Why can't you pretend nothing happened? Because Scorpio doesn't pretend the veil is still intact. It isn't. It never will be again. This can be brutal. Scorpio knows how brutal it can be. Knowing too much too soon, seeing beyond what the situation allows you to see, sensing the rupture before others around you realize something has changed, is a burden few understand. But the veil tore from top to bottom. Not by accident, on purpose. What Scorpio sees after the veil is torn is not a curse, it is responsibility. It is the function of one who was designed to operate on the boundary between what is visible and what has not yet been named. This is one of the most difficult and most liberating truths about this sign. And there's a practical extension for those who come to this realization and ask themselves, what do I do with this? The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose answers exactly that, not with theory, but with a process. How Scorpio learns to live with the veil torn without being consumed by what's on the other side. How to transform vision into direction, not burden. How to use what you see to build, not just to endure. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. The furnace. The image of the furnace appears some of the most dramatic times in sacred texts. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Nebuchadnezzar's furnace, heated 7 times hotter than normal, so hot that it killed the soldiers who threw them inside. And inside the furnace, not 3 figures but 4. The 3 who were thrown in, and something else that the king could not name. The fire didn't destroy them, it refined them. Gold that goes through the furnace doesn't come out destroyed, it comes out purer. The fire burns what isn't gold, not the gold itself. And the higher the temperature, the more complete the purification process. Cheap gold can't withstand the maximum temperature. Pure gold comes out of the furnace, more gold than when it went in. Scorpio processes emotion like an oven. It doesn't store it on the surface. It doesn't file it away to think about later. It takes it inside, to the heat, to the place where things either transform or reveal themselves as they truly were. The relationships that Scorpio cherishes intensely have been through the oven and come out like gold. The loyalties it holds are not naive, they are refined. Its view of people is not superficial, it's the result of years of high temperatures. There is another image of fire in sacred texts that completes this reading, the fire of Pentecost. Not the fire that destroys, not the fire of punishment, but the fire that descends upon each person individually and transforms who they were into who they should be. A fire that does not spread from person to person by contact, that touches each one at the exact point where the transformation needs to happen. Scorpio recognizes this fire, not the fire that levels everything, the fire that goes deep, that finds the specific point, that transforms exactly what needs to be transformed and leaves intact what is already gold. The problem isn't the furnace, it never was. The problem is when Scorpio starts to believe that the furnace is punishment, that the intensity with which they live is a mistake, a deviation, an excess. When they start to judge themselves by the heat they feel inside, as if that heat were proof of something wrong with them. But Nebuchadnezzar's furnace was not a punishment for those inside. It was a revelation for those watching from the outside. Scorpio's intensity is not excess, it's process. It's what happens when someone is designed to refine, not just to record. And this process, this ability to descend to the depths, to transform through heat, to emerge different after each descent, is not accidental. It is not the result of trauma, of excessive sensitivity, of a lack of emotional control. It's a function. There is a concept in sacred traditions that rarely comes up in conversations about astrology, and which explains Scorpio better than any description of a planet or position. The concept of the sacred boundary, the place between 2 worlds, between 2 states, between what is visible and what has not yet been revealed. Priests in ancient traditions operated on that frontier. Prophets operated on that frontier. They weren't the most comfortable. They weren't the most beloved. Often they were the most misunderstood, the loneliest. Those who carried visions that the rest of the people weren't yet ready to receive, but they were necessary. They were the ones who had the capacity to be where others couldn't be, and to bring back something that the rest needed. Scorpio operates on this border, between depth and surface, between what is said and what is felt, between what has died and what is yet to be born, between the pain that paralyzes and the pain that transforms, between the version of the person that existed before a revelation and the version that emerges after the veil has been torn. A lighthouse isn't built where the sea is calm. It's built precisely where the sea is most dangerous, because that's where the light makes the biggest difference, not as punishment, for a purpose. The lighthouse didn't choose where it is. It was designed for that specific place. Scorpio was placed on the most difficult frontier. The Bible describes this place with surprising clarity in the symbols of the eagle that flies too high to be reached, the serpent that carries healing and danger in the same form, the fire that refines without destroying, the veil that tears to reveal what was hidden, the descent into the abyss that precedes every true rebirth. None of these symbols are small, none are comfortable, all are necessary. Scorpio is not the cursed sign. It never was. It is the sign of the most demanding sacred process that exists, that of dying to one version of oneself so that another, truer and freer one can emerge. The Bible is not afraid of this process. It describes it as the path of those who have been called to something beyond the surface of things, beyond what is easy to name, to fit into, to accept without resistance. You carry it inside. You always have. The intensity that the world sometimes called excess, the depth that the world sometimes called a problem, the fierce loyalty that the world sometimes called an obsession, all of this has a name in the oldest texts known to the Western world. It is named after someone who was designed to operate where light is most needed. Now you have the words for it.